Aria Chen was the conscience of a billion-dollar company. She ran data integrity at Apex Solutions, a place where the air was cold and the silence was bought with the data of billions. For 6 weeks, she'd been drowning in their flagship AI product, Project Chimera. She didn't find a bug. She found a lie. Woven into the deepest code, a critical privacy backdoor, designed by the CEO himself, Victor Sterling. His mandate wasn't innovation, it was covert, non-consensual monetization. When Aria stood up to him, "I won't adjust the risk, this is illegal," Victor didn't wait for her to resign. He chose public, calculated cruelty. The next morning, she was marched out of the building, a public execution for standing on principle. Her career, her reputation, gone. The severance package was a final insult, just enough to keep her silent, but not enough to fund a fight. Victor Sterling thought he had won. He thought he had silenced the one person who knew his biggest secret. He was wrong. 2 months later, in a cluttered garage, Phoenix Labs was born, a tiny, impossible team fueled by cheap coffee and the shared memory of betrayal. Their mission? To build the ethical alternative, to make Victor Sterling's deceit obsolete. Victor came at them with market manipulation, with a private army of expensive lawyers, trying to choke them with paper and debt. But Aria found his fatal flaw, the proof he thought was buried forever. She didn't leak it to the press for personal glory. She sent it to the regulators. She didn't attack the man. She attacked the foundation of his trillion-dollar company. The cold marble of Apex Solutions held sound the way a tomb holds silence. It was a billion-dollar stillness, bought and paid for by the data of billions of users. Aria Chen, head of data integrity, and, in many ways, the conscience of the entire operation, felt the chill deep in her bones, and it wasn't from the climate control. For 6 weeks, she had been drowning in the code of Project Chimera, their flagship AI product. It was brilliant, terrifyingly powerful, and utterly compromised. She hadn't found a bug, she'd found a mandate, a critical privacy backdoor, designed by the CEO himself, Victor Sterling. His mandate wasn't innovation, it was covert, non-consensual monetization. When Aria stood up to him, "I won't adjust the risk, this is illegal," Victor didn't wait for her to resign. He chose public, calculated cruelty. The next morning, she was marched out of the building, a public execution for standing on principle. Her career, her reputation, gone. The severance package was a final insult, just enough to keep her silent, but not enough to fund a fight. She had lost her career, her reputation, and the belief that decency could ever win in that high-stakes arena. Aria sat in her empty apartment, looking out at the city where Apex's illuminated logo shone like a false god on the skyline. The institutional knowledge she carried, the very insights into Apex's weaknesses, felt less like a weapon and more like a bitter, useless burden. But the bitterness eventually began to curdle into a cold, hard resolve. For 2 months, she drifted. Then the silence was broken by 2 calls. One was from Ben, her lead engineer, a genius with a dry wit and an almost religious devotion to clean code. The other was Maya, a systems architect known for her fierce loyalty and ability to build anything. Both had quietly resigned from Apex after Aria's firing, citing a change in corporate direction. They met in Aria's small, cluttered garage. The air smelled of old oil and new ambition. "We need a name," Maya said, sketching diagrams on a whiteboard that leaned precariously against a stack of tires. "It needs to be something that rises from the ashes," Ben murmured, soldering a prototype circuit board. Aria looked at the mess, the tiny team, the ridiculous impossibility of it all. She called it Phoenix Labs, and our mission is simple: to build the ethical alternative, to make Victor Sterling's deceit obsolete. Victor came at them with market manipulation, with a private army of expensive lawyers, trying to choke them with paper and debt. But Aria found his fatal flaw, the proof he thought was buried forever. She didn't leak it to the press for personal glory. She sent it to the regulators. She didn't attack the man. She attacked the foundation of his trillion-dollar company. The struggle was brutally real. The small severance vanished into rent, filing fees, and cheap takeout. They worked 18 hours a day, fueled by cheap coffee and the shared memory of the apex betrayal. They weren't fighting for money. They were fighting for the integrity of their life's work. Aria learned to write legal briefs. Maya mastered cold call fundraising. And Ben, bless his soul, kept the servers running on minimal power. The shadow of Apex was omnipresent. Every VC pitch was met with the same nervous question. How do we know Victor Sterling won't bear you in litigation before you even hit beta? They were persona non grata in the Silicon Valley ecosystem, victims of Apex's quiet, pervasive intimidation. Hope, when it finally arrived, was quiet and unexpected. Aria had sent hundreds of pitches. One landed on the desk of Dr. Alina Voss, the formidable managing partner of Solstice Capital, a firm that lived and died by its ESG, environmental, social, and governance mandate. They met not in a polished VC office, but in a quiet, sunlit cafe. Dr. Voss listened, not to the market projections, but to Aria's voice, the raw conviction in her defense of user privacy. Aria, Dr. Voss finally said, folding her hands, the technology is sound, brilliant even, but I'm investing in the fire in your eyes. I'm investing because Victor Sterling didn't just fire an employee, he created his own enemy. Apex is a dinosaur that believes the old rules of exploitation still apply. Your product proves they don't. Solstice provided a seed investment. It was small, a fraction of what Apex spent on office coffee, but it was crucial. It was the validation they needed, external proof that an ethical company could and should be a profitable one. Phoenix Labs moved out of the garage and into a cramped, noisy office, finally able to hire 2 more engineers. Aria looked at the small bank balance. It wasn't a war chest. It was a sling holding one smooth, perfect stone. Phoenix Labs decided to bypass the US market, which was too entrenched by Apex, and focus on the European Union. The stringent demands of GDPR were not a limitation for Phoenix. They were the core value proposition. The product launched to immediate, if small, acclaim. The European press loved the narrative, the clean, compliant underdog offering radical data transparency. Users could see, in plain language, exactly how their data was being used and revoke access with a single click. It was the antithesis of Chimera's hidden backdoors. The growth was slow but organic, driven by trust. We aren't selling software, we are selling trust. And trust, once lost, is the most expensive commodity in the world, Aria told her team. Apex's European market share began to bleed, not torrentially, but steadily, like a slow, irritating drip. The executives at Apex dismissed it as a localized nuisance, but the numbers didn't lie. Phoenix Labs was gaining traction in the most security-conscious market in the world. Aria felt the first flicker of true, clean hope. The revenge wasn't in hurting Victor, it was in proving him wrong about the market. Victor Sterling was not a man who tolerated irritating drips. He tolerated nothing that challenged his perception of inevitability. The Apex counterattack was brutal, multi-pronged, and immediate. First, they launched a deeply discounted, near-identical service, leveraging their massive infrastructure to sell the product at a price Phoenix Labs simply could not match. The move was pure market manipulation, aiming to financially starve the smaller company into oblivion. Second, the lawyers descended. Apex's legal team, a private army of expensive suits, initiated a relentless series of frivolous, high-cost patent infringement lawsuits. Each filing required thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours from the Phoenix team to simply respond to. Aria felt the old panic rise. They were being choked by paper and debt. The tiny capital from Solstice was being diverted from development into legal defense. She would spend her days coding and her nights writing depositions, the exhaustion pulling deep grooves under her eyes. "This is what Victor does," Maya spat one night, tossing a fresh cease and desist letter onto the table. "He doesn't fight fairly. He just makes the fight too expensive for the good guys. Then we make it so expensive for him to keep fighting that he stops," Aria replied, the anger now cold and functional, not hot and blinding. She was learning to fight like Victor, but for a moral purpose. The pressure was relentless, and Aria felt close to breaking. She was doing everything right, yet the sheer size of the antagonist threatened to erase her. Then, an encrypted message arrived. It was from Dr. Michael Reese, Aria's former mentor and the man who had initially hired her at Apex. He was still the most respected mind in the firm's data science division, and he was deeply disillusioned. They met in a subterranean bar, miles away from the watchful eyes of Apex security. Dr. Reese looked older, weighted down by institutional guilt. "Aria, you were right," he admitted, swirling the ice in his glass. "Victor didn't just launch Chimera with the backdoor you found. He's made it standard operating procedure. They've covertly doubled down on the unethical data harvesting, but they've gotten smarter. It's now hidden beneath layers of plausible deniability disguised as predictive resource allocation. It's worse than before." He pushed a small encrypted drive across the table. "This is the proof. Internal communications, financial projections tied directly to the data exploitation, the real risk assessments, everything you need. I couldn't stomach it anymore. I'm retiring early. Use this." Aria stared at the drive. It was the antagonist's fatal flaw, handed to her by a conscience-stricken colleague. The evidence was undeniable. This was the moment of decision. She had the proof to destroy Victor and Apex immediately. But the victory felt cheap, a personal spite. She didn't want to just win a fight. She wanted to end the war on data integrity. Apex Solutions, arrogant and confident, had scheduled a massive follow-on IPO to fund a global expansion and officially absorb the loss from the European bleeding. This was Victor Sterling's moment of final victory over the market. Aria knew this was her window. If she used Dr. Reese's evidence for a public media hit, Victor would spin it as the desperate act of a disgruntled, fired employee. It would be a messy, personal battle. That wasn't the revenge she craved. Her revenge was systemic. It was about proving that the market required ethics. She spent a week compiling the evidence. Instead of leaking it to the press, she created an anonymous dossier and sent it via highly secure channels to the most powerful, most ruthless regulatory bodies in the world: the European Data Protection Board, the Financial Conduct Authority, and the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC. Her gambit was this: don't attack the man, attack the foundation of his company. She chose justice and regulatory action over personal glory. "We aren't interested in gossip, Ben," she told her team, who were bewildered by the sudden shift. "We are only interested in fact and compliance. We let the law do the talking." The first tremor hit. 3 days before the IPO launch. The news broke not as a scandal, but as a chilling procedural announcement. SEC and European regulators launch coordinated investigation into Apex Solutions' data integrity and financial reporting. The wording was clinical, but the effect was catastrophic. Apex stock tanked overnight. The IPO, meant to raise billions, was immediately suspended. Investor confidence, already brittle, shattered completely. The media seized on the narrative. suddenly remembering the quiet firing of the whistleblower, Aria Chen. Victor Sterling's empire was jeopardized not by Phoenix Labs' superior product, but by the exposed lack of ethics he had deemed necessary for profit. He was facing the prospect of hundreds of millions in fines and, worse, a complete public loss of trust. Aria watched the news in their little Phoenix Labs office. There was no cheers, no high fives, just a heavy silence. It wasn't a celebration. It was the quiet, necessary moment after a bomb drops. She hadn't destroyed the company. Victor had done that himself when he chose deceit. She had simply illuminated the fault lines. The distress at Apex was immediate and terminal. They began stripping assets to cover the mounting legal fees and regulatory fines. Meanwhile, Phoenix Labs, suddenly the global symbol of trustworthy data integrity, became an investor darling. Their Series C funding round was massively oversubscribed. They were swimming in capital, and everyone wanted a piece of the ethical success story. Aria, still weary, but now possessing cold-eyed focus, saw her ultimate move. Apex was forced to sell off its non-toxic, structurally sound international operations division, the very market Aria had focused on. It was where the best, most ethical engineers and infrastructure lay, the ones who were tired of Victor's lies. Aria used her newly acquired war chest to buy that division at a deep discount. It wasn't simple corporate expansion. It was the ultimate act of reclaiming her work. She absorbed the best of her former colleagues, the institutional knowledge and the core infrastructure Victor had stolen from her. Her revenge was completing the vision Victor crushed, turning Apex into the ethical company it should have been. Phoenix Labs was no longer an alternative, it was the new standard. A year later, Aria Chen stood on the cover of Forbes, the headline stark and triumphant. The Ethical Phoenix, how Aria Chen built trust into a trillion-dollar industry. The journalist, sitting across from her in Phoenix Labs' bright, transparent headquarters, asked the inevitable question. Miss Chen, all of this, the incredible success, the market domination, the fall of your previous employer, is this at its core a tale of revenge? She paused, looking out at the skyline where the Apex Solutions logo still shone, but now diminished, a relic of a dying era. Victor Sterling had quietly resigned his position weeks earlier, citing health reasons. She smiled, but it held no malice. Revenge is a poor motivator, she said, her voice carrying the deep conviction of a person who had fought and won a moral war. If you build your entire strategy on destroying the competition, you're still focusing on the past. This wasn't about hurting Victor. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with the future. This was about building something so fundamentally good, so transparent, and so indispensable that the old way became obsolete. The market didn't need us to tear down Apex. It simply needed a better choice, and we gave it one. The victory, she realized, wasn't the acquisition, the funding, or the fame. It was the silence of the conscience, finally at rest. The marble was still cold, but the foundation was now built on solid ground. The victory wasn't the acquisition or the fame. It was proving that ethics pays better than deceit. What's the biggest corporate betrayal you've ever witnessed? Hit that like button if Aria's story inspires you, subscribe for more deep dive stories of power and principle, and let me know in the comments. If you were Victor, would you have resigned quietly or fought the SEC to the bitter end? I'm reading all your responses.